Hey everyone, it's Jason here, and this week we're talking about Genesis chapter 6. Now, in Genesis chapter 6, we're going to focus on one phrase that we're going to expand on here that we're not going to expand on a lot of time in the sermon. But that phrase is the phrase sons of God. And it's one of those phrases that has caused some, you'll say some interesting theories in modern days. And I say in modern days it's been a thing because traditionally speaking, back in the Jewish tradition, this is around Jesus' time, through the early church fathers, there was just one understanding, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So what we're going to be looking at specifically is Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 4. So Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 1, it says, "When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful. And they took any they chose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, My spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth, both in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind, who bore children to them. They were the powerful men of old, the famous men." All right, so that's verses 1 through 4. In these verses, we see this phrase, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they went down and took wives as they chose. And then we see that God is not pleased with this. Man is always evil continuously, and he says he's going to limit their years to 120 years. It says the Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward. Now, there's a couple words here that are unique. That phrase, sons of God, and then the title of the Nephilim. All right, we're going to start with the Nephilim first. The Nephilim, that was a compound word. It's the words fallen and one. So it's like a plural form of fallen. So it's the fallen ones. That's what Nephilim means. Ultimately, that's where that compound word is later where the Hebrews get their word for giant. So the root word of giants, or the word they're derived from, was fallen ones. And so this idea is like when you get to later in the Old Testament, we get to David and Goliath. It says the giant. That root word for giant, you go back to this, is a root word to this word Nephilim, which means fallen ones. So it's a very interesting imagery there, which when we get to David and types, we'll talk about that. But you have here the Nephilim, so it's the fallen ones. So it's a weird wording. And so that goes back to this idea of who are the sons of God. Now, two basic common modern interpretations are, one, it could either be talking about the line of Seth, or secondly, it's talking about fallen angels. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's one that during Jewish tradition at Jesus' time, and then with the early church fathers, there really wasn't a question. Well, it was fallen angels. The Son of God referred to fallen angels. But first, let's talk about the line of Seth idea. When people say it's the line of Seth, the sons of God are the lines of Seth, they're trying to differentiate between the idea that the sons of God were believers and the daughters of men were unbelievers. So it was like the children of Seth were marrying the daughters of Cain. Now, there's not anywhere in Scripture, any other place of Scripture that points you to that. That is just a theory that came along, or an idea about that passage. Well, we're going to go with this. And so there's not really any scripture somewhere that kind of mentions there's a line of Seth, there's a line of Cain that intermarried. You don't really see that. They take it maybe from the New Testament passages where we're not to be unequally yoked, that, Christians aren't to marry unchristians, believers shouldn't marry unbelievers, those type of things that Paul mentions in Corinthians. But here in this context, we don't see that. All right, we don't see that it's directly talking about a line of Seth or a line of Cain when it says sons of God and daughters of men. And so we're going to talk about the fallen angels, the sons of God being fallen angels. And that phrase in Hebrew, sons of God, and throughout the Old Testament is only ever used to refer to angels. For example, Job chapter 1 and verse 6, it says, "One day the sons of God," same phrase there, "came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them." Uses that phrase again in Job chapter 2, verse 1. "One day the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord." And so you see throughout the Old Testament that specific phrase, sons of God, the way it's constructed in Hebrew there, only ever refers to angels throughout the rest of Scripture. And so, but that's not the only place we see this. See, we see the idea of fallen angels being connected to the day of Noah in the New Testament in Peter's writings and in Jude's writings. So 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 10. For if God didn't spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into hell and delivered them in chains of utter darkness to be kept for judgment, and if he didn't spare the ancient world, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others whom he brought, who brought the flood on the world of the ungodly, and if he reduced the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes and condemned them to extinction, making an example of what is coming to the ungodly. And if he rescued righteous Lot, distressed by the depraved behavior of the immoral, for as that righteous man lived among them day by day, his righteous soul was tormented by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. And the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteousness under punishment for the day of judgment, especially those who follow the polluting desires of the flesh and despise authority. So what you see here is you see Peter trying to draw a line between the godly and ungodly and how God does preserve his people and the unrighteous will be judged. And here in this example of that, he links fallen angels to the story of Noah. You know, he's saying, hey, I judged because of these fallen angels, but Noah was saved. And later he says, I've judged Sodom and Gomorrah, but I saved righteous Lot. And so he was given those examples. So he connected the fallen angels in Genesis to Noah. Then Jude echoes this phrasing in Jude verse 5 through 7. It says, now I want to remind you, although you came to know all these things once and for all, that Jesus saved a people out of Egypt and later destroyed those who did not believe, and the angels who do not keep their own position but abandon their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal change in the darkness of the judgment on that day. Likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns committed sexual immorality and perversions and serve as an example by undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. So here again, you see angels in eternal change. It's this same phrasing that Peter uses in 2 Peter chapter 2. This idea of angels being kept in utter chains, in a pit of darkness. Now, why is that significant? Because all throughout the scriptures, we see that there are demons, there are fallen angels roaming the earth or possessing people. We see Jesus casting out demons. So why is there a very specific set of angels that are in chains, that are being held captive until the day of judgment? Well, I think Jude gives us that in that the angels did not keep their own position, but abandoned their proper dwelling place. And I think that's what we're seeing here in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 4. You see these sons of God, these angels, leaving their proper place, the place that God has put them in the created order. If you remember in the created order, in Genesis chapter 1, God said, okay, after their kind, they reproduce and multiply after their kind, after their kind, after their kind. And so what you have here is you have the angels breaking that order and coming in to man. Man is not after their kind. Angels and man are different. And so you see here, I think the angels here, these fallen angels, what they did is they broke the order of God. They left their place and their position, and they sinned in a unique way in which God took them and placed them in eternal chains until the day of judgment. And I think another reason I think these are fallen angels, speaking of, that came down and intermarried with men and created the Nephilim, which again, that root word means fallen ones. I think it goes back to Genesis 3:15 as well. When the first prophecy we get of Jesus, when God said to Eve, I'll put enmity between your seed between your seed and her seed. And so there's going to be an enmity between the seed of Satan and the seed of man, the seed of Eve, which we know is a reference to Jesus. And so I believe that seed of Satan is a reference to the Antichrist. But a lot of people say, yeah, but in the New Testament, Jesus says we're going to be like the angels in heaven, that we don't marry, we're not given in marriage. True. When we get to eternity, we're not going to be marrying and starting new relationships. The church, the bride, us, are going to be married to Christ. There's not going to be marriage. It doesn't mention, it just says the angels don't marry. It doesn't mention that they can't procreate with mankind. All right, now, the nuances, how that happens, some people say, well, it wasn't that the angels physically intermarried with the daughters of men, what happened was they possessed people. And when they possessed people, then they used the people to intermarry with the daughters of men, and they used mankind in possession and things like that. So that's a nuance that the Bible doesn't really get into. We don't really know. But I think what we can gather from Scripture is that you have some fallen angels who left their proper place, intermarried with the daughters of men, and then God has punished them by putting them in eternal chains until the day of judgment, which we know at the day of judgment they will be released and then cast into the lake of fire. And you can read that in Revelation. So what we see here is, I believe we're seeing that the fallen angels left their proper place. But we know that one day Satan is going to commit that same sin. And he's going to bear a seed, the Antichrist. And the Antichrist is going to come to power, and Christ will come and triumph over the Antichrist. And so this is what I believe chapter 6 is what we're seeing. Fallen angels intermarrying with the daughters of men, creating the fallen ones, the Nephilim. And then you have that. And you may say, hey, but what about when it says they were there before and after? Well, there's a good possibility that some of Noah's sons married offspring of these relationships, where the fallen angels married the daughters of men and had children. And then you may have seen Noah's children marrying some of those children. And so that's how they were able to continue on. Their bloodline, or so to speak, their seed was able to continue on post-flood. Like I said, this is one of those, these are 4 verses that theologians like to spend a lot of time on, trying to explain, understand, get a nuance. I think the simple reading, the traditional Jewish understanding, and the understanding of the early church fathers, I believe is the right one, because I believe 2 Peter chapter 2 and Jude verse 5 and 7 point us back to the fact that fallen angels left their proper place and intermarried with the daughters of men. And God condemned that and brought them under chains of eternal punishment. And so there you go. That is the controversial, if you want to say, or the odd thing in Genesis chapter 6. And there'll be some other things we come through in the rest of Genesis that just seems odd and out of place and seems strange. But this is one of those strange things in Genesis chapter 6. If you have any questions, or if you want to talk about this further, I'd be more than happy to do that with you. Hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday.